At 11:52 on Christmas Eve, I was standing in the snow in a t-shirt. Not a jacket, not a coat. My mother had said, "You ruin everything, Clara. You always ruin everything. Just go outside." And I had gone, and the deadbolt had turned behind me, and I was 22 years old, standing on my parents' front step in December in Missouri without my phone or my keys. Before I take you to what happened at 11:52, one quick thing. If you have ever been the designated problem in your family, the one who ruins everything, the one they blame, the one they send outside, subscribe so the next story finds you, and tell me in the comments what word they used to describe you, what name they called you when they needed a reason. I read every one, and I think most of us were given a label that was never actually ours. At 11:52, a patrol car came down the street. 2 officers got out. One walked toward me. The other had a folder under his arm. They did not ask for me. They asked for my father. Here's the whole story. I grew up in a house in St. Louis where my father, Martin, was the kind of man who needed everything to be a certain way and was skilled enough at making it seem that way to people outside the house that no one looked too closely. He ran his own financial consulting firm, which sounds substantial and was presented as substantial, and which I now understand, from my current vantage point, was probably not as substantial as the presenting suggested. He drove a car that communicated something deliberate. He told the same stories at the right volume, knew when to laugh at other people's jokes, had a handshake that people described as firm and confident, and was, as far as the observable world was concerned, solid and respectable. From the inside, the house had a different quality. From the inside, there were moods that moved through the rooms without warning, moods that could arrive between a sentence and its completion. And there was the monitoring of those moods that became, over years, the primary activity of everyone who lived in the house. My mother, Diane, was very good at the monitoring. She had learned, somewhere in her early married life, to read my father the way a person learns to read a sky, looking for the early signs, adjusting direction accordingly. She was so practiced at it that she barely seemed to be doing it. It just looked like the way she moved through the house, the choices she made, the things she said and didn't say. I was not as good at the monitoring. I noticed too many things and said some of them out loud, and wanted things at the wrong times, and asked questions when asking questions made things worse. I was the child who did not arrange herself around the moods, or could not, or wouldn't, depending on the day. And that quality was named, in the vocabulary of that house, as the problem. I was difficult. I was sensitive. I made things harder. I ruined things. The "you ruin everything" started when I was about 8. Not in those words at first, but in the feeling those words contain. The specific feeling that your presence disrupts something that was going fine before you arrived and will go fine again once you are managed or removed. By the time I was a teenager, the feeling had crystallized into the actual phrase, delivered by my mother in the clipped, exhausted tone of a woman who had calculated that managing my father's moods and managing me simultaneously was beyond what she could do, and that I was the one she could put outside because I did not control the finances and I did not control the mood of the house, and I could be put outside. And I say this without trying to make her a villain, because I have come to understand her differently. I say it because it happened, and because knowing why something happens does not change what it costs. And it cost me a childhood of believing that I was the problem in a house where I was never actually the problem. That Christmas Eve, we had been watching a movie. We had gotten through dinner without incident, which was not always the case and which produced in me the particular low-level anxiety of a person waiting for something to happen because it usually did. The movie was something festive, something with snow in it, and we were watching it, and I made a comment about something on the screen. I don't remember what I said. That is the thing about these moments. The thing that starts them is always so small that you can't hold on to it, because it was never actually the thing. The thing was always already there, waiting for a comment to arrive that it could attach itself to. My father's face changed, the way it changed when something had been added to a balance that was already past what it wanted to carry. My mother's eyes moved immediately from the television to his face, and then to mine, and I could watch her doing the calculation, and the calculation came out the way it always came out, and she said, "You ruin everything, Clara. You always ruin everything. Just go outside." I went. The door closed, the deadbolt turned, and then I was standing on the front step of my parents' house on Christmas Eve, 22 years old, in a t-shirt, in December in Missouri, with my hands already going numb and no phone, and no keys, and nowhere immediately to go. The neighborhood was dark and quiet and entirely decorated for a holiday about family, and I sat down on the step because my legs had gone strange, and I looked at the lights in the windows across the street, and I thought about what it means when a woman's family is on the other side of a deadbolt on Christmas Eve, and nobody is coming to open it. That is where I was at 11:52 when the patrol car came. In the minutes before it came, I counted the Christmas lights across the street. 11 houses I could see from that step, all of them lit, most of them with the warm shapes of people visible through windows. Christmas Eve at 11-something, and every house on the street had someone inside it, including mine. Mine just didn't have me. I thought about knocking on a neighbor's door. The Hendersons were 2 houses down, and I had known them my whole childhood. I thought about the gas station 2 blocks over, the one that stayed open late, where I could at least stand somewhere warm. I thought about all the practical options, and then I stopped thinking about them, because the practical options all required explaining what had happened, and explaining what had happened required saying it out loud to someone, and I was not ready to say it out loud. I knew what it meant if I said it out loud. It meant this was real, and it had happened, and I was not going to find a way to make it not have happened. So I sat on the step. My hands went past numb and into the stage that is past numb. A car went by slowly, someone going somewhere on Christmas Eve, and its headlights swept across the step and across me and kept going. The snow was coming, down lightly, the kind that looks decorative until you're in it in a t-shirt. And it had stopped being cold and started being the thing underneath cold. The thing that is just absence, just the steady removal of what was there before. And then the patrol car turned onto the street. I don't know if a neighbor called it in. I don't know if someone driving by saw a woman sitting on a front step in a t-shirt at almost midnight on Christmas Eve and thought something was wrong. What I know is that the patrol car came down the street and slowed and stopped in front of the house, and 2 officers got out. One of them walked toward me, unhurried, the specific unhurriedness of someone trained to approach without alarm, and asked if I was okay. I said I was fine, the automatic answer. The one you give when you have been trained your whole life, in the specific way I had been trained, to say you are fine and not make a thing of it. The other officer had a folder tucked under his arm, and he was looking at the house. "Is there a Martin Holt at this address?" the first officer asked me. My father's name, not mine, not about me at all. "Yes," I said. "Would you mind if we knocked?" "Uh-huh." I stood up from the step. My hands were past numb by then, that particular stage of cold where you have stopped feeling the cold and started feeling a distant tingling that is worse in a different way. I stepped to the side, and the first officer knocked on the door, 3 times, solid, the kind of knock that doesn't ask. My father opened the door. He was in his Christmas sweater, the red one he put on every Christmas Eve, with the particular deliberateness of a man performing his own traditions at himself. He had a drink in his hand, and he opened the door with the exact expression I had seen him wear for 22 years when he had decided something and was prepared to deliver the decision from a position of authority. The expression that meant, "I am in charge of this. This is my house. You do not come back in until I say so." It took him about half a second to understand that the faces on the other side of the door were not mine. He smiled. The reflex. My father was very good at producing the right face for authority figures, at being the affable, competent, reasonable man. And that smile came up fast and automatic, the same smile he used with clients and neighbors and anyone else whose impression of him he was managing. "Officers. Warm, easy. What can I do for you?" The second officer, the one with the folder, stepped forward. "Mr. Holt? Martin Holt? Madden Holt." "That's me," the smile still on. Still the man in charge. The officer with the folder opened it. He removed a document and held it out so my father could see it clearly. "Mr. Holt, we have a civil enforcement order from the probate court of St. Louis County. There's a judgment entered against you related to a trust account belonging to your mother's estate." He paused, measured. "We've been asked to serve you formally. Prior attempts at your registered address were unsuccessful, so we're here tonight as the enforcement window closes at midnight." He said it the way people say official things, without particular weight on any word, all of it equal, the judgment and the estate and the enforcement window, just the flat transfer of documented fact from one party to another. My father's smile lasted about another 3 seconds, then it didn't. "I'm sorry," he said. The smile entirely gone now. "This is Christmas Eve." "Yes, sir," the officer said, patient and completely unmoved. "It is. We're required to serve this tonight as the enforcement window closes at midnight, if you could confirm your identity and accept the document." My mother appeared in the hallway behind my father. She came to stand at his shoulder the way she always positioned herself when things were happening that she hadn't been told about. Present, but slightly behind, reading the room before she committed to a response. She looked at the officers, she looked at the folder the second one was holding, and then she looked at me, standing to the side of the door in my t-shirt, in the snow, and I watched her face do several things at once that resolved into no single expression. Nobody said anything for a moment. My father took the document. His hands were steady, but the steadiness was the practiced steadiness of a man who has spent a long time knowing this moment might come, and has been rehearsing his response to it. Not the steadiness of a man who was actually calm. His jaw was tight. The smile was entirely gone. He had the look of a man who has just understood that the room he has been managing has had a door in it all along that he could not control. "Is there anything else?" he said. "No, sir. You've been served. You'll want to contact your attorney first thing in the morning." The officer paused, very briefly. "Merry Christmas." The officers went back to the patrol car. I watched them, back out of the driveway and drive away, their taillights disappearing around the corner of the street. And then I stood in the quiet with the snow coming down and turned to look at my father. He was still reading the document, or he was looking at it. I am not sure he was reading it, because he had known what it said long before it arrived on his doorstep. What he was doing was the thing a person does when they need to look somewhere other than at the people around them. My mother was looking at him, not at me, at him, with the expression of a woman who is doing a very fast and quiet accounting of something she thought she understood and is now understanding differently. She had the look of someone who has just realized that the thing they have been arranging the furniture around, the thing they have been managing and avoiding and clearing the dishes to escape, was never what they were told it was. I stood in the snow in the doorway of my own parents' house, and I looked at both of them, and nobody said anything. "Can I come inside?" I said. My mother stepped back. My father did not move or speak or look up. I came inside. I went to the couch. I sat on it, the same couch I had been sitting on 2 hours earlier when the evening was still almost normal, and I put my hands between my knees to warm them, and I looked at the Christmas tree with its blinking lights, and I listened to my father walk down the hall to his study and close the door. Controlled, quiet, the thing. Close of a man who maintains control even now, even here, even with the document in his hand. Nobody opened a present that night. Here is the part of this story that I want to be careful with, because it would be very easy to tell it as the moment my father got what he deserved and I was vindicated. And the truth is more complicated and also more human than that. My grandmother, my father's mother, had died 2 years before that Christmas Eve. Her name was Ruth, and she was a small, fierce woman who had worked as a bookkeeper her entire adult life, who had understood the value of $1 with the specificity of someone who had never had too many of them and had never expected to. She was the one in that family who saw me clearly, not the problem, the grandchild. She would call on Sunday evenings and ask real questions and listen to the answers, and when I was old enough she told me once that she worried about me in that house, in a way she didn't say more about. But the worry was real, and she expressed it in the only language fully available to her, which was money set aside carefully. She saved, for decades, quietly, into a trust she established for her grandchildren, which meant for me. My father was named trustee. He was her son, and she trusted him. And in families like mine, men are handed these responsibilities without much examination of whether they should have them. My grandmother, who was in most ways an extremely clear-eyed woman, had the blindness that I think many mothers have about the child who most resembles the person they wanted him to become. She could see me. She could not, or would not, fully see him. I had known, in the incomplete way that adult children know things when adults have decided they don't need to know them clearly, that something was wrong with the trust. A conversation at Thanksgiving the year before. My uncle on the phone, controlled and tight in a way I had not heard before. My father in the next room going tighter. A letter on the kitchen counter one morning, an official-looking envelope, and by afternoon it was gone. The fact that I had turned 21 and asked my father, as carefully as I knew how to ask him things, about the trust my grandmother had left, and he said there were complexities being sorted out, and then changed the subject the way he changed subjects when they became inconvenient, seamlessly, so you sometimes didn't notice until the new subject was already underway. Each of these things separately was nothing. Together, with the knowledge I had accumulated over 22 years about what my father's evasions looked like, they were a shape I didn't want to look at directly. Because looking directly would have required understanding my father as a person who would do a particular thing to a particular person. And that person was me. and I was not ready for that understanding. Not until a patrol car made it unavoidable. The document the officers delivered on Christmas Eve was a civil judgment from the probate court of St. Louis County. My father had misappropriated funds from my grandmother's trust over roughly 18 months. The money had been designated for me, not some of it, all of what he had accessed. He had been running from that document for 2 years, which meant that for 2 years, while I was being described as the problem in that house, while I was being managed and monitored and sent outside on Christmas Eve in a t-shirt, the man doing all of that had been carrying the specific low-level anxiety of a person who is one court document away from being found out, and the thing not yet found out had, in direct and specific terms, something to do with me. The label he gave me, the problem child, the ruiner of things, the designated disruption, was at least in part a management strategy. Keep the attention on me. Keep the conversation about my behavior. Keep everyone in the house arranged around the question of what Clara did wrong, while the question of what Martin had done went unasked. The attorney I later hired told me it could have been criminal. It was pursued civilly. My father owed the trust owed me. Here is what I did and did not do, because both matter. I did not gloat. I sat in the living room of that house on Christmas Eve, in my t-shirt that was still cold from the outside, and I did not say anything designed to make my father feel what he was feeling more intensely than he was already feeling it. Not because I am a particularly good person, because I was 22 years old and I was exhausted in a way that went below the bones, the exhaustion of a person who has spent her whole life being managed and explained and sent outside, and gloating was the last thing I had the energy for. What I felt was not triumph. I want to be precise about this, because the story would be simpler if I had felt triumphant, if the 2 officers and the document and the serving of my father on his own doorstep had produced in me some clean sense of vindication. It produced something more complicated. It produced the sadness that comes when you finally understand clearly, without a way back to not understanding, that the family you have been trying to deserve your whole life is not actually the family you have been given. Not cruel monsters, not villains, just people who were managing something and used you as the explanation for the managing. And on Christmas Eve, the managing met the world, and everyone in the doorway understood it at the same time, and the sadness of that was, and is, entirely real. My father stood in the hallway with the document. My mother stood behind him. The Christmas tree blinked in the other room. Nobody said anything for a long time. Then my father walked down the hall to his study and closed the door, not slamming it, closing it. The controlled close of a man who has maintained control his whole life and is doing it now. In this moment too, even with nobody to impress anymore. My mother looked at me with an expression that had too many things in it to name, and then she went to the kitchen, and I sat on the couch I had been sitting on 2 hours earlier when the evening was almost normal, and I looked at the Christmas tree, and I stayed there for a long time, warming my hands, thinking about nothing much. 100 inside on them at all then, since I'm an omen, wani on the moment. I slept in my old bedroom that night because it was past midnight on Christmas Eve and the alternative was nowhere. But before I fell asleep, I pulled the bag I kept under the bed. The bag I had learned to keep there for the times when leaving needed to happen faster than packing could. And in the morning I packed it, and I went to my friend Priya's apartment, and I did not go back to that house to live. That was the last time that house was my home. I did not announce it. I did not make a speech or issue a statement or say anything to my parents about the fact that I was leaving in a way that was final. I just packed the bag and went. Some endings do not need to be declared. They just need to happen. And then you walk out of the door that was locked against you, this time from the inside, and you get in your car, and you drive to Priya's apartment, and she opens the door and looks at you for a moment, and then steps back without asking any questions, because she has known me long enough to understand what the bag under the bed means, and that questions can wait until morning. Morning came. She made coffee. I told her everything. It took a long time. What came after is its own long story, and I won't give you all of it. But here is the shape. My father hired an attorney and attempted to dispute the judgment on technical grounds. The judgment held. The trust was eventually restructured under court supervision, and the money designated for me was distributed over about 14 months. Not all of it, because legal fees have their costs and time has its costs, but enough to matter. My father and I went 3 years without speaking after that Christmas. His choice, not mine. I did not chase him. I had spent 22 years chasing something that wasn't there, and I was done. In those 3 years I finished the degree I had started and stopped twice. stopped because the money was always complicated, and starting again because the degree mattered, and I was going to finish it regardless. I moved to a different city, one that was mine and not anyone else's, where nobody knew the shape of my childhood and I could be exactly who I was without the weight of what I had been called. I got a job. Got a better job. Began, slowly and with a great deal of practice, to understand what it felt like to be in a room without monitoring for the mood shift, without the background calculation of what I was about to do wrong. When you have been trained to read a room that way from childhood, the reading happens automatically, below decision. And unlearning it is not a matter of deciding to stop. It takes years and deliberate practice, and sometimes a therapist who explains what you are doing and why you are still doing it. I am still learning. I expect to be for a while. That is all right. My mother called about a year after that Christmas. Not an apology, exactly, but adjacent to one. She said she was sorry it had gone the way it had, which is different but not nothing. I have come to understand something about her I want to say carefully, because her cruelty was real and also did not exist in a vacuum. She had been married for 25 years to a man who managed her perception of everything, who had arranged the family so that I was the designated disruption, because a daughter who asked inconvenient questions and noticed things she wasn't supposed to notice was a problem for a particular kind of order, and it was easier for him if I was the problem. She was taught that. She taught it to herself. That does not excuse it. It helps me understand it. We talk occasionally now, carefully, and there is trust being rebuilt in small pieces at the speed honest things get rebuilt. My father sent one email, 4 years out, formal, nearly businesslike. He said he had done something wrong and wanted me to know that he knew it. He did not ask for anything. I wrote back 2 sentences. Thank you for saying that. I hope you are well. I meant both. I work in estate law now, paralegal first, at Greta's firm, because she had been the one who helped me navigate the judgment and who looked at how I thought about the problem and said, unprompted, that I should consider law school. I was 24 and it seemed like a large impractical idea. She said most useful things do. Law school at night, 4.5 years, working during the day, studying in the evenings, taking the bar twice because the first time I was so exhausted I could barely read the questions, and Greta said, try again, you know this, material, and she was right. On my second attempt I passed. I found out by email, on a Thursday afternoon, sitting in my car in the parking lot of the building where I worked. I read the email 3 times. Then I sat there for a while without doing anything. I thought about the step. The Christmas Eve step. The t-shirt. The hands past numb. The 11 lit windows across the street. I thought about my grandmother Ruth, who had saved carefully for decades and left money for me that my father then spent, and who is the reason I understand, with more specificity than a textbook could provide, what it feels like when a trust is used as a personal account by the wrong person. I thought about Greta, who had said try again, you know this material, which was the most useful sentence anyone said to me in that period of my life. Mornen almzadas, I thought. That step is what it took to get here, and I would not trade the getting here. I would give a great deal to have not needed the step to start. Monen practice in the area of trusts and estates. The field that deals with money and family, and the specific damage that happens when the two get confused in the wrong hands, when the person responsible for protecting something decides to use it, when the trusted one treats the trust as inventory. I know what that damage looks like from the inside. I knew it before I knew the legal framework for it, before I could name the specific statutes, or the probate codes, or the elements of a fiduciary breach. I knew it from a step in December, with my hands going numb, and my grandmother's money somewhere it was not supposed to be. The legal language came later. The understanding was already there, sitting on the step, before the car came down the street, before any of it resolved into anything I could use. Understanding always arrives before resolution does. That, too, is something I learned on that step, that night, before anything else. I understand from the inside what it feels like when a trustee treats a beneficiary's inheritance as his own resource. That understanding did not come from a textbook. It makes me better at the work. The people who come to me with exactly that problem. And it is not a rare problem, it is common. It happens in families that look fine from the outside, in families where the man in charge has a nice car and tells the right stories. Those people get from me something I couldn't have given them if I hadn't sat on that step with my hands going numb. They get someone who already knows the shape of the thing before they've finished describing it. That is what Christmas Eve cost and what it eventually became, and I have made my peace with both being true at the same time. I am not going to stand here and tell you that Christmas Eve in the snow was the best thing that ever happened to me, because that framing is dishonest about how much it cost. It cost me years. It cost me the specific trust that a child is supposed to be able to have in the people who made her, the baseline confidence that the floor will hold. And when that trust breaks early, you spend a long time testing every floor before you commit your weight to it. That is not a personality trait. That is a reasonable response to a specific education. The healing is real. And I want to say that clearly because I don't think it serves anyone to end a story like this in permanent damage. The healing is real, and it is ongoing, and it has required more sustained, honest work than anything else I have done, including the bar exam. It is also slow, slower than you want, more circular than you expect. It is not complete. I have come to believe that complete is not the right metric for this kind of thing. What you are going for is continued, not the absence of the wound but the presence of everything you build around it. What I have built around it is what I've described. That part belongs to me. So here is what I would hand you from all of this. From someone who was locked out in the snow at 11:52 on Christmas Eve in a t-shirt while her father stood inside with a drink and a Christmas sweater managing the narrative. The thing being done in the dark, in the next room, in the folder that appears on the counter and disappears by afternoon, in the conversations that stop when you walk in. The thing being kept from you. The thing you have been made the problem to distract from. It eventually requires its own confrontation with the world. Not because justice is automatic. It is not automatic. But because things that are built on concealment have a structural problem, which is that concealment requires constant maintenance, and the person doing the maintaining is also doing other things, living a life, managing a family, trying to keep the story consistent, and eventually something slips. A letter appears on a counter. A prior address comes up in a search. A court's patience runs out, and the enforcement window closes at midnight, and somebody has to drive out on Christmas Eve. You don't have to engineer any of this. You don't have to expose it, or chase it, or fight for it in the dark. What you have to do is survive long enough, and stand in your own honest, inconvenient presence long enough, and not disappear into the story they've told about you. And one night the patrol car comes down the street on its own. One night the knock is not about you. One night your father opens the door with his managing smile, and it is not a face he can manage his way through. You are not the problem. You were never the problem. The problem was what was being managed, and you were the explanation given for the managing, and the two are not the same thing. Know the difference between the label you were given and the person you actually are. The label was assigned by someone who needed an explanation for something that had nothing to do with you. The person you actually are has a coat somewhere, and a degree you finished, and a city you built, a life in, and a career you made from the specific wound they gave you. And somewhere down the road someone will come to you with their own version of the folder and the document and the Christmas Eve, and you will know what to do with it because you were there first. Stand in the cold. Have somewhere to go after. Keep building. And one more thing, because I think it matters and I don't want to skip past it. If you are in a house right now where you have been given a name that is not yours, where the explanation for everything wrong is somehow always you, where you are the designated disruption in a family that needs a designated disruption to avoid looking at something else, know that the name is a tool, not a verdict. It was put there because it was useful to someone. It served a purpose. It will stop serving that purpose when the thing it was protecting stops needing protection, whether that happens because the thing comes out on its own or because the managing finally gets too heavy to keep up. Either way, eventually the name stops being useful. The officers come down the street. The folder opens. The document gets held up in the doorway. And when that happens, or before it happens, or in the long cold time before it happens, you will still be there, unchanged in the ways that matter. The same person you were before they handed you the label. The person who sat on the step and waited and did not disappear, even when disappearing would have been easier. That person is who you build from. That person has always been enough. Start there. You were never what they called you. And one day, at 11:52, everyone in the doorway will understand that. If this story found you tonight, subscribe so the next one reaches you. Because every week I tell another true-to-life story about someone who stood in the cold and then built something on the other side of it. And I would hate for the next one to miss you. And before you go, tell me in the comments about the night you finally understood what the real problem was. The moment the story your family had been telling about you stopped making sense, and the actual story came clear. Put it down there. I'll be reading every single one.